Hello and welcome to another episode of Cavell Cloud Conversations. Finbar, Patrick,
Hello.
analyst at Cavell. We do analysis on the cloud communications market, CCAS, UCAS. We've got it all. It really fits under the hood. You can fit a whole lot of communications into these brains. We are here today to talk about a topic near and dear to Patrick's heart, well, maybe, which is WEM, Workforce Experience Management. So, for those who don't know, we're really talking about, forecasting demand of workforce, understanding and managing how your employees are doing, analyzing their performance. These days, of course, using AI to score the sentiment on their calls and the intelligence on their calls and do a bit of analytics, understanding when they're available and communicating that to other people. And really, I mean, you could think of this as a contact center thing. And obviously, as a CCAS analyst, I think of everything as a contact center thing. But it isn't just because, you can build these sorts of tools to work into the UC, into the communications ecosystem to understand and help you understand where your employees are being productive, unproductive, and all these other kind of things. But in the context, right, why are we talking about this? Well, obviously, we have RingCentral. We have RingCentral with their new WEM platform, which I think was launched earlier this week. Patrick, have you been following the news on that?
Yes, I have seen that. So that is now live. I think it's been in beta.
Maybe since last week. Yeah.
Beta for quite a while. I think it's really interesting. It's coming from, and I thought your initial point is a really good one, because when I think of workforce engagement management, I immediately think of the contact center.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. It does go much further than that. And I think we've seen we've done work with various vendors, which, in projects over the past number of years, who've looked to increase what I would have called usage analytics within UCAS platforms. So how users are using the platform. And I think that now completely leads in to a much more formalized workforce engagement management solution. And I think that's what you're seeing within Ring. They've launched it within Ring CX, which is their own proprietary contact center platform. And I think the direction of travel is that we're seeing a lot more vendors coming from the UCAS side developing their, what I would call, usage analytics, moving towards more formal WEM, and also from the contact center side, obviously you've got Verint, you've got the higher end solutions there that are coming down, because this, especially in a remote world or a hybrid world that we're in now, that is even more important to understand how users are using the tools that you give them, and are they using them in the optimum way.
And also, I'm very sure it's also available not just within Ring CX. I think it is also available as a standalone product as well. So it isn't just with their contact center, but it obviously does enhance that. So I guess the big question for us as analysts is why? Like, why? So when you look at a company, when you look at some of the bigger players in the contact center space, and they have their workforce management tools. We know that NICE has one. We know that a lot of the bit larger companies have them. But then when you start to see people like RingCentral bringing out these tools, I know that Zoom has invested in workforce management tools as well. That really starts asking that question, which is, there's something else going on here that indicates that this isn't just an extra add-on that the largest companies will want to buy. This is something that, the mid-market will want, the SMB will want, that like a whole range of companies now need this feature, which is why it's becoming added to the rest of the vendors, not just the vendors who have everything in their bucket.
Yeah, and it's no longer, I think traditionally you'd have thought of engagement management solutions in the very high-end contact center, so large contact center deployments. And you're right. So as to the why, I think when we do our, and most of the listeners will know, every year we survey tens of thousands of businesses. Finbar, you lead that research about their adoption of technology. One of the key questions that vendors and ultimately their partners who sell these solutions is it can be quite difficult to prove ROI in terms of those investments. So one of the key ways you can do that is through usage analytics. What percentage of your users are using what percentage of the features within any particular platform. So that might be, although you wouldn't call it workforce engagement management, but within collaboration platforms, you mentioned Zoom already. If you look within Teams, the analytics story within Teams has advanced incredibly over previous years out of Viva. The same thing within WebEx. So I think there's probably two key drivers. Firstly, businesses trying to understand with a hybrid workforce where a significant proportion of your users are not working in the office every day, you're not peering over their shoulder. You want to know what they're doing. Are they using the tools that you've given them in order to do that work? And what percentage of the features within those tools are they using? And then also from the vendor side, you want to be able to prove to the businesses that you sell your solutions to that actually you're going to see a significant return on the investment. You're outlaying a significant ongoing OPEX investment in your SaaS product, and we can show you that the adoption levels of the particular solution and particular features that you might be paying for on an add-on are beneficial. Do you think that is the sort of rationale?
I think, and maybe you'll agree with me, that's like level one, right? Level one of the rationale is, I need to know whether the tools I'm deploying are actually being used and actually working. I need more add-ons to sell into my customers. I need to, keep my customers sticky with good data and, enhance my credibility with them. I think that is level one. That's the first reason that they would deploy workforce management and analytics. I think the second reason is, we are seeing companies like Ring pushing towards more usage of AI, more AI tools, and we have to be honest that as part of workforce experience management, as part of the tracking and the analytics and all that stuff, you are generating data that allows you to better manage, implement, and orchestrate your AI tools, right? It's not just, are my employees using it? It's what makes a good employee using it versus a bad employee using it. What piece of data from these interactions can I take out and feed into a different system? At a company with a lot of volume of people who are calling each other like we do on a regular basis, understanding what the common reason that calls are initiated and then finding a way of plugging that into a piece of data, AI-powered data optimization or something like that, is valuable information for whatever comes in 2 or 3 years' time, whatever the next thing is. Because you might say, Patrick, Finbar, and Tom are always calling each other to ask where the research is, right? Finbar, where is that research? Do you know what folder it's in? Because I don't know what folder it's in, or vice versa. Did we ever ask a question about this, right? And I'm not saying to the audience that is something that definitely something that happens, right? But the point is, you might think, okay, there are 30 calls a week between people at my company about where is that piece of information. That is a learning I can take away that there is an integral problem with fundamental data access and data storage.
Yep.
I can then take and deploy an AI agent that's going to, we've talked about doing this, about going through all the data so that when Patrick doesn't need to bother me for 5 minutes, not that I'm complaining, or vice versa, when I have a UCAS question, I don't message Patrick and say, when did we ask this question about UCAS? What are people saying about it? I can talk to an agent instead, which saves 5 minutes of Patrick's time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then if you think 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week, 4 weeks in a month, and assume it happens for longer than 5 minutes, right, with more complicated queries, suddenly you're looking at maybe saving 100, 200 hours a year, across a business of our size, but then across a bigger business.
Yeah, thousands of users. Yeah, no, it's almost an internal optimization point as well. Not just, you're right, the level one is an understanding of usage, and then level two, an internal optimization tool in terms of, performance analytics, quality management as well as a sort of second point within that. And a lot of the new workforce management solutions that we've seen coming out, both and primarily within the contact center, utilize artificial intelligence in terms of the data analysis. So I suppose that's dramatically improved their own capability in recent years compared to what was available a few years ago.
Yeah, entirely. Especially in the contact center, that is the way things are going now. There is a bit of a question mark, which I'm sure the audience will find quite interesting, about the response from agents when they know they're being monitored all the time, and that's something I don't think the industry is properly reconciled with, because before you had your manager and you knew that they weren't looking at every call, and you were nice and insulated from the risk of saying something wrong or doing something wrong, and now your manager can see every call. You're like, okay, now I have to be a bit more nervous all the time. But I think what's interesting to me, if we think the use cases are one thing, but it's more like what it says about the vendors, what it says about the Zooms and the Ring Centrals, the 8x8s of the world, that they don't, they step away from I sell communications to I sell workflow and productivity tools. Is that the trajectory that we expect from our vendors? Right, is that they're not allowed to get away with just selling communications anymore?
Well, I think that is the fundamental question that we've been asking at a number of our events, and anyone who's listened to the previous podcast will know that. I think one trend that we are seeing undeniably is a convergence of technology, and it's something, this isn't revelatory to anyone that's listening to this. You had, if I go back to when I started in technology, which is obviously only very recently because I'm so young, it wasn't decades ago, you had these very siloed buckets. So you had comms, you had your IT stack, you probably had your line of business specific vertical stack, you had HR software. And what you have seen is increasing convergence. And you look at those vendors, so you mentioned RingCentral, you mentioned Zoom, you can list any of them, Microsoft, Cisco, they now have varying levels of a whole technology stack. So whether that's UCaaS, whether that's UCaaS and CCaaS, which are the most common ones we see, increasingly we're seeing on the data management side. We're yet to see any huge CRM acquisition by any of these vendors, if you take sort of Microsoft aside from that, but that's always rumoured. So I would completely agree that we are seeing convergence, and that the more visibility you can get across those different tools in terms of how businesses are using them, how to optimize that from a user perspective and a management perspective is increasingly valuable. So yeah, I think convergence really does lean into that.
So here's a question which I find quite interesting. It kind of ties into what I was saying before. Like, you're a telecoms buyer. You need to get your entire employee base to engage with your communication system, not to use shadow IT, not to talk to each other on WhatsApp, to actually speak to each other. And everyone's done this at every company you ever worked with. Sometimes you send the message on the Teams, and sometimes when you want to say something spicy about one of your other colleagues to one of your colleagues, you send a message on WhatsApp, right? Everyone's done it. But the point is that we're taking a communications platform, and we're saying this platform isn't just what we need you to use, and we need adoption to be very high because we've paid for it. It's also the platform that's going to be measuring and monitoring you. Now, maybe because we work at small companies, that's a bit naive, and this has already been happening for quite a while, and people are used to their teams saying how long they've been online for to their boss and giving an activity management profile and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But do you think that is a tension that exists when we start adding in workforce management and monitoring into a core communications proposition?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I remember a few years ago talking to a particular vendor that I won't name, where they looked at within a UCaaS platform across their entire engagement, analysing all of a user's communication, so all of mine or your communication, so both internal and external if they had external, and so both asynchronous and voice if you paid for the license that recorded that, and that would give you a communication score based on the sentiment of your interactions, and then that score could be reported to your manager, and if you fell below a certain threshold, then that would flag as an issue. So I think you're right. It does pose an interesting question, and I think we'll look at this in research in the future. And I don't think we asked a bit about it in agent experience, but we've never done it from a sort of general user perspective in terms of what concerns do employees have about their activity or their general engagement at work being monitored from a sort of quantitative side. I think that's always been happening from a qualitative capacity anyway in any business. Anyone, a manager has always been, sort of anecdotally gauging the sentiment and the activity levels of their team. But I think you're right. When you start to use maybe a more automated AI product for that, does that cause sort of philosophical questions in terms of how that's scored, how my initial benchmarking is done? So I think you're right. That raises a really interesting point about questions from a user perspective.
I think the thing that's fascinating to me, again, it kind of ties back to that contact center loop we're talking about, is that, as you say, before, your managers were doing it anecdotally. They were sitting in on some meetings when you were on your best behavior. Obviously, if your manager was sitting in, they might ask to listen in on some of your call recordings or something like that. But you weren't. It's the 100%. I think that's something that the industry, both communications and CCAS, probably needs to understand more as we move into this workforce engagement management, full stack monitoring, that kind of thing. Is what is the impact of that 100% 360-degree view on your employees? And because we may get into a system where the best practice is that you don't get detailed information on every single call that your employees do. It only flags a certain amount of the errors, or it only flags when the threshold goes above a certain amount, right? So then you can say to your employees, look, if you make a small mistake, the system's not going to notice. It's only going to notice if you go massively off script. And then all of your employees are like, okay, that's fine. So if I say one or two words wrong, no one really cares. And if I talk for 10 minutes about my love of bridges, then okay, my manager's probably going to get flagged, right? I'm just giving.
I don't have a problem.
Right?
I don't have a problem with you talking to someone for 10 minutes about your love of bridges. In fact, I'm quite interested about your love of bridges. So. But no, I think it's a really interesting, and I suppose that comes down. That is a business process point. What parameters do you set, and also, how open are you within? And we, heard story. Well, we didn't hear stories. We knew in the pandemic there are particular pieces of software that certain businesses install on, hardware machines that, manage keystrokes and do all sorts of things. And whether that was necessarily made public to users or it was buried deep within a contract, that is an entirely separate issue. So as a business, it is your responsibility to set the parameters in terms of what you're monitoring, what you expect from employees, and then obviously, using these tools, that's great as long as that has been set from the employee perspective, and they understand that, and it's all completely in line with what they're expecting in terms of their performance monitoring.
And I'm glad you said the word process, because we've come full circle again to the same conclusion which we've had a few times on this podcast. But every time we start talking about a new technology area or a subject area, in this case WEM, I find it quite interesting when we end up coming to the same conclusion, which is that here's an interesting technology. It works, we know it works, and here's the processes and the best practices to actually run and deploy it. And we don't know what those are yet. And that has happened. It happened with AI in the contact center. It happened with some bits in the UCAS. I'm trying to remember, where did it happen in the UCAS?
Oh, you're right. It's absolutely that. The misuse of tools has happened absolutely all over the place. But you're right. I think when you mentioned shadow IT earlier on, ultimately, if you overprescribe this sort of stuff, you don't follow the right process, you will just force users to use another platform to communicate where they know they're not being monitored. So that's the balance that businesses strike.
Yeah, exactly. And throughout all of this, there is an understanding that the technology is advancing very, very rapidly, but the processes that we need to actually deploy that technology in a productive and best practice fashion really haven't evolved yet to meet that. And there's a learning process going on across the entire industry. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I was going to buy WEM or I've deployed WEM, but I'm still not entirely sure the best way to use it, this is the reassuring part of the podcast where I tell you that you aren't alone. And a lot of other people are also reporting to us that they are struggling to understand the best processes for dealing with these new technologies, not just WEM. As we wrap up, I mean, this is obviously a very exciting time for the industry as vendors keep expanding outwards with their plans. But we are probably going to see some more competition and friction and clashing. it's going to be an exciting few years, I think, for the space that we monitor. And obviously this podcast is here to give you the answers about what is going to happen.
Or ask more questions. Either way, we're doing one of the two.
Yeah, well, exactly. Maybe we won't actually tell you what's happening, but we'll leave you just being like, you guys have confused me again. That's all right too. We'll take it. I've been Patrick. I've been Patrick. I've been.
I love that outro.
That's been
perfect.
Patrick. We don't edit this podcast that much, so we leave all those kind of fun bits in. If you found this interesting, let us know. If you have any questions, let us know. What topic should we discuss next? Give us an idea, and we will probably get to it. Like and subscribe. That's what we say.
Thanks, everybody.
Tell your friends. Speak to you all very, very soon.